Most of us start off loving nature. Whether it's climbing trees, swimming in the sea, or picking wildflowers, we all have memories of fondness for the natural environment. Even children who grew up in an urban environment take joy chasing pigeons down the street, or poking at the ladybirds who are crawling up the weeds in the side of the pavement. Yet, by the time we're adults, for a lot of us in the Western world, this joy and admiration for the natural world is gone. Poof. Even those of us who took our love for nature and cradled it, held it close to us with the hope and the dream that one day we would make a career out of it, well, for the majority of us, that dream just never comes true. So what is it that lies between a 4-year-old's love for ladybirds and a 24-year-old's depression as they sit day in and day out indoors? Well, the education system. And a sprinkling of capitalism, of course. Our education system is kind of wild. Actually, literally, it's kind of the opposite of wild. At a young age, we're forced to sit in a classroom 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, staring at books and papers and screens. It's of no wonder then that once we're spat back out of the system at 16 or 17 or 18, we face levels of disconnect from nature unheard of at any other point in our history. According to Rewilding Britain, people in modern industrial societies now spend 90% of their time in indoor, artificially temperature-controlled spaces. And another study found that in England, only 8% of children aged 5 to 16 visited natural environments with their schools. But specifically, how does this impact the children themselves? Well, apart from the obvious observation that most children would rather spend time being active and creating rather than sitting still in an indoor space for 5 days a week, researchers found that being better connected to nature is all round better for child development, as well as for children to foster a healthy relationship with the natural environment. For example, one study in Florida found that children who enjoy nature, have empathy for other living creatures, have a sense of oneness, and feel responsibility for the natural world, are more likely to develop an interest in spending more time in nature, which may in turn enhance their physical and psychological health. In addition, children that spend more time in nature are naturally more connected to nature, leading to them being more likely to be interested in environmentally friendly practices. Learning, understanding, experiencing nature, and living close to nature positively influence the development of a child's attitudes towards nature, which makes them more likely to perform environmentally friendly practices in the future. And another study by the RSPB showed that children who are more connected to nature literally do better academically, scoring higher in subjects such as English, and also have a better health and life satisfaction. So if spending time in nature and fostering a better connection to nature has been proved to make children healthier and help them develop a mutual relationship with the natural environment, then why the hell are we locking our kids up indoors for 6 to 8 hours a day? Well, that involves diving into the whole education system, and that is far too long a video for today. Safe to say though that a 9 to 4 school model, 5 days a week, is a great training ground to pump kids straight into a 9 to 5 work life 5 days a week to keep the economy growing. After all, the most valuable jobs in our world are the ones that keep our economy growing. It's of no surprise then that nature is discarded and relegated to a space far away from the classroom, that learning about it is narrowed down to memorizing the Calvin cycle of photosynthesis or the function of the immune system, because those at least could help mold kids into working in a lab to grow genetically modified crops to help make the agriculture industry more profitable, or working in a big pharmaceutical laboratory to make the next medicine more profitable. Ecology, though? Learning about the relationship between plants and animals, fungi and bacteria, humans and landscapes? Learning how everything is interconnected, getting out in the soil and growing plants, and watching insects metamorphose? Helping kids to foster the connection they already have with nature? Well, that's not profitable. That won't make good little workers, so it's just not done. Just a side note here, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I swear. Obviously, researching new medicines and vaccines and solving agricultural problems is super important. My point is more that these are the parts of biology and ecology that are valued in our current education system because they have the opportunity to make a profit. This needs to change. And it doesn't need to change in a way where we simply drag kids outside for a few hours, talk at them about trees, and then put them back inside the classroom. As Robin Wall-Kimmerer says in her book Braiding, Sweetgrass, "The land is the real teacher. All we need as students is mindfulness. Paying attention is a form of reciprocity with the living world, receiving the gifts with open eyes and open heart." Allowing kids to have the space to learn from nature as they would want, with help and mentorship and guidance from adults in a non-hierarchical way, would allow their connection and respect for nature to grow, leading to healthier, happier, and more environmentally friendly people. After all, learning, taken apart and aside from school, is something inherently valuable. And learning about nature doesn't need to be a case of sitting indoors for hours on end, reading textbooks or writing tests. There are so many ways learning about the natural world can be explored. Through practical activity, of course, through learning to grow food or to identify plants and birds and insects, through exploring new areas for traces of wildlife or swimming in wild places. But also through play, through art and reading and writing, through learning how to build things in harmony with the natural world, or through media and documentaries and video games. After all, as Robin Wall-Kimmerer so wisely says again, knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. So, a kid finally gets through an education system stripped bare of nature. For 13 years, they sit still for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, working hard. And in their free time, they have the privilege of experiencing the natural world, whether through wildlife documentaries or playing in the garden or going on trips to the coast or to the forest. Because it is a privilege. According to Our World in Data, more than half of people across the world now live in urban environments. And in the UK specifically, in 2020, 82.9% of people lived in towns and cities. I'm not going to go back into the stats I've already explored in previous videos about the appalling lack of green spaces here in the UK and the poverty and increasing cost of living crisis that millions are facing, but it's pretty dire. So if you're a child who managed to continue fostering their admiration and love for nature in the face of decades of austerity, an education system which blatantly rips you apart from it, and a country which is already extremely nature poor, in whichever country you are, but especially here in the UK, and then you have enough financial security to throw yourself into a degree with absolutely no secure career paths. Finally, you're here, you made it. You're finally learning about what you always wanted to, nature. You're finally ready to get a hands-on approach to learning about the life on our planet. Finally ready to learn about how humans are impacting nature and how we can reverse that and recreate a thriving natural world. But yeah, that's not quite what ecology at higher education looks like. Okay, so this part of the video is going to be more about my personal experience studying a degree in conservation biology and ecology at a higher level in the UK. Let me know in the comments if you had a different experience studying a nature degree from wherever you are in the world, but hopefully you'll be able to relate to at least some of my points. Most of my degree was incredibly theoretical. Like, I spent most of my time indoors, looking at slides or writing essays and reports, or looking at things under a microscope in a laboratory. Which is fine. It's important to learn the key principles and theories behind ecology and how nature works. And it is interesting to dissect things and look at things as a microcosm. But learning about nature whilst being completely removed from it seems insane. Going on trips outside to nature once every few weeks to examine some niche aspect of an ecological theory or to look at trees for 2 hours just doesn't feel right. It's reinforcing the same idea that the education system has fed us with since day one, that we're separate from nature and it must be broken down and peered at and prodded at from an indoor space, that it must be examined from behind a white coat or a screen. To be honest, I didn't learn much from my degree. Sure, I learned about the classification of invertebrate life and how to model populations, but did I actually learn anything from nature? Did my degree help me to refoster that connection with nature that I had lost as a child? No, it didn't. I learnt more from starting a conservation non-profit and reintroducing water voles back to Cornwall, but that is a long story for another day. My frustration grew with the version of ecology taught in higher education when I went up to COP26, one of the annual climate conferences that year was happening in the UK. I think up until that point, ecology and nature in my head had been very separate from climate and anything social or political. But something there changed. I finally started connecting the dots that our destruction of the natural world is inherently linked to capitalism and the climate. Eventually, I began to understand that everything is connected back to our hierarchical systems. The ridiculous thing is that is all stuff that should have been taught to me in my degree. If there was one thing that was worth teaching from a theoretical approach, it would have been examining how our social and economic systems are driving the climate and ecological crisis. But none of that was ever discussed. I came back from COP26 having watched Indigenous activists in one room begging politicians to do something about climate change, and then watching those same British politicians in another room joking about how are British people going to cope without their tea when the tea crops failed. Well, I came back from COP26 to my degree to a module about communicating climate, and I thought we're finally going to talk about how the growth economy is linked to climate change and the ecological crisis. Yeah, no. Instead, I spent a lecture listening to some drivel about how communicating about climate change needed to be softened to appeal to people who didn't believe in climate crisis. I think at that moment I felt so frustrated with the education system that I mentally disconnected from the rest of my degree. I mean, I did well. I had to because I was taking out a £9,000 loan a year to pay for the privilege of listening to someone tell me how to appeal to climate deniers. But none of it really seemed to matter anymore. I mean, different people will take different things out of their experience. I've got friends who have continued into academia to PhD level and really enjoy their research now. Enjoy making new discoveries and doing science. And I find that really admirable. I really admire people who stick to something so broken out of pure passion, especially when ecological research and academia in this field are incredibly overworked and underpaid. For me, I feel like my ecology degree actually made me fall more out of love with nature, and not just because I was forced to write boring essays. I was finally beginning to connect the dots between everything, to deepen my understanding between the climate and ecological crisis and capitalism and the state and hierarchies. Yet, everywhere I turned, no one in my field was talking about this. Not academics, not my lecturers, not my peers. And when I began to look at the deplorable state of conservation careers, it was the same. Don't get political. You won't be employable. We've got to keep the rich funders happy. We've got to make nature conservation palatable to the profit-driven state. So, finally, you've come out of the other side of education. You haven't quite got what you came after, but hey, you've got a certification that says that you dedicated 3 or 4 years of your life to studying nature. And now you want to put it to good use. You want to help restore ecosystems and help the natural world. But where are all the jobs? Yeah, well, the thing is, nature conservation and restoration just isn't profitable, so you've only really got 5 options. 1. Become an ecological consultant and work with dubious development companies or similar who want to mitigate for the fact that they want to build on land that really should be left alone just to turn a profit. 2. Team up with one of the nature finance bros TM that are finding new ways of monetizing nature by turning it into a credit scheme. 3. Continue in academia, dedicating your life to securing pitiful amounts of funding to study one niche thing in very much detail for very long hours and being very underpaid. 4. Become one of thousands of applicants who are trying to secure one of the very few jobs in the non-profit sector, which, by the way, you can't apply for in the first place unless you were in a privileged position during your degree to be able to volunteer thousands of hours to same said non-profits, because they want tons of experience for an entry-level job. And 5. Give up on the nature dream and do something else with your life. Well, yeah. Things are looking pretty dire. So I can see now why the depression catches up to us. We get nature systemically educated out of us as children, a university education which is further removed from systems thinking. And when we finally stumble through to the finish line, it's a fucking desert out there. Capitalism has sunk any meaningful work into pits so deep there are already thousands of other similarly degreed students clawing their way down to try and pick up the dregs of any work that is left. You know, I often think that restoring the natural world would be the kind of career path that would foster cooperation. But these kind of conditions would incite selfishness and competition in anyone. And maybe that's the fucking point. Because if it were easy, if we were allowed to love nature and foster our connection to it, if we were guided to think more deeply about how our profit-driven and hierarchical systems are what is driving the destruction of ecosystems, the extinction of thousands of species, and the obliteration of the natural world in the first place, then the state might have a riot on their hands. It's better to keep people separated from nature, to drive them to the ground with work, to squash the dreams of the majority and let a few make it, a few nature celebrities or nature finance bros TM, so that there's always that little bit of hope in the back of people's minds that make them think, that could be me one day too. After all, without hope, there would probably also be a riot. Okay, maybe I am being too cynical here, or maybe not, I don't really know anymore. So what do we actually need to do to change all this? What is the alternative? Could we actually, have a real ecological education? Wow, this video has been very negative so far, so I'm gonna flip it around. Let's all imagine a solarpunk world. A world without a growth economy, without hierarchy, without state. A world where individuals organise themselves as they like within their communities. What would ecological education in that world look like? Well, I invite you to imagine with me. I see a world where children learn from nature by being in nature, in whatever way meets their needs and desires. I see a world which harnesses biophilic design in buildings used for education, because lots of research has already shown the positive impacts of natural ventilation, natural lighting, and being more connected to the outdoors on students. I see a world where educators guide children to learn to foster their connection with the natural world, to understand how life grows and dies, how organisms flourish and decompose, how humans are a part of the natural world and the natural world is a part of us. I see a world where children who want to become experts in anything ecological are guided on how to do so, through a mixture of both practice and theory, holistic thinking and specialism. And I see a world where working to protect and restore nature is inherently valued, not because of its potential to make a profit, but because nature is what we breathe and eat and live in. I see a world where there is an abundance of opportunity for anyone who wants to dedicate their lives to protecting wildlife or growing plants or researching the interconnectedness of life. So what do you think an ecological education would look like in a solarpunk world? Let me know in the comments down below. See you in the next one!